Welcome. I have the opportunity of welcoming you today. My name is Brian Brown. I'm a professor of science education, and more importantly, I have the honor of representing my colleagues in the program on race and equality, language and education, and we warmly invite you to a special presentation today. One of the benefits of being at Stanford is that you get to regularly hear from world-class scholars. And I want to make it clear today that this is not an ordinary event. We are privileged today to hear from a world-class scholar. So the question is, what constitutes excellence in scholarship? A couple things I want to share. One is a good idea. You underestimate sometimes how difficult it is to think about things that other people have thought about in new ways. So the excellence and innovation of an idea is at the heart of what world-class scholarship looks like. Secondly, methods to document the amazing things that happen in young people's education also stands at the heart of what counts as excellent scholarship. And finally, innovation. How do I offer a new way to explain that thing we all know to be true, to make visible that thing that was once invisible, and to make it so simple and clear that everyone can understand? And today we have the benefit of hearing from a scholar who does all of those things in a really powerful way. In order to provide an appropriate introduction of that scholar, I'm going to introduce our moderator for today. So your moderator is Kendra Shabomaheen. Mama Dimmick. There you go. A doctoral candidate at Stanford University in the science education and teacher education program, as well as a member of the race and equality and language education program. Informed by her own experience as a homeschooling mother, her research explores the burgeoning Black homeschooling movement and community as an expression of the Black radical imagination, emphasizing resistance and collective dreaming within educational paradigms. Prior to coming to Stanford, Kendra earned her BA in Ethnic Studies with a concentration on African American Studies at the University of Washington and a master's from our own program of science teacher education here at Stanford University. Driven by a commitment to transformative educational practices, she is dedicated to reimagining and empowering educational spaces that uplift Black children and families. Welcome forward, Kendra Shabomaheen.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here with y'all today. I have the privilege of introducing our guest today, Dr. Bianca J. Baldridge is an associate professor of education with expertise in community-based education and critical youth work practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. As a sociologist of education, Baldridge's research explores the socio-political context of community-based youth work and critically examines the confluence of race, class, and gender and their impact on educational reforms that shape community-based spaces engaging Black and Latina youth. In addition, she explores the organizational and pedagogical practices employed by youth work professionals amid educational reforms and restructuring. Baldridge's first book, Reclaiming Community, Race, and the Uncertain Future of Youth Work, examines how racialized market-based reforms undermine Black community-based organizations' efforts to support comprehensive youth development opportunities. Her book received the 2019 American Education Studies Associate Critics' Choice Book Award with the support of the National Academy of Education Spencer Foundation postdoctoral fellowship program. Baldridge studied how racial disparity discourse shapes community-based spaces that engage Black youth in predominantly white cities that espouse a liberal and progressive ethos. Her current research examines broader issues of equity facing the out-of-school time, sector nationally, the precarity of the youth work profession and how Black youth workers navigate anti-Blackness, and how Black community-based youth organizations respond to city change and displacement fueled by gentrification and educational restructuring. Baldridge's research appears in the journals such as the American Education Research Journal, Review of Research and Education, Teachers College Record, Educational Researcher, and Race, Ethnicity, and Education. Her second book with Stanford University Press examines the experiences of Black youth work professionals amid a sociopolitical context marked by persistent anti-Blackness and social unrest. Baldridge's experience as a youth work professional in the U.S. and abroad, also informed her research profoundly. With a deep commitment to engage, research, and disrupting oppressive youth development spaces, Baldridge works with several out-of-school time networks and facilitates communities of practice with organizational leaders and youth development professionals nationwide to sustain justice-oriented and humanizing youth work practices. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Baldridge.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I have to especially shout out Kendra for saving me this afternoon. I couldn't find the building. I was wandering on campus and she came to get me, so I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm really excited to be here. I also have to admit that my heart is really heavy right now, just concerned for college students throughout the country whose peaceful protests are being met with militarized state violence. And so at this moment, I'm sort of holding the feelings of both and, which is actually really fitting for my talk today, because we're going to be talking about contradictions and paradoxes and what it means to hold multiple feelings at the same time. I'm grateful for the invitation to share my latest thinking about my next book project. I'm currently a currently a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. And so I've been there for most of the year, and it's nice to talk to people outside of my discipline and outside of education, but it's sometimes better to come to this kinds of space to engage with folks like you all who have an interest in education. So I'm going to just jump in. Charlie is an outspoken Black queer teen whose joy and laughter are infectious. Charlie's family and school create an unsafe environment for them to be who they are. Charlie participates in a college preparatory and youth development program in Harlem, New York. The program is a safe space for Charlie. It offers programming that affirms their Black queer identity and offers counseling, healing center engagement, and opportunities for leadership through activism. 28% of LGBTQIA+ young people in the US are unhoused at some point in their teen years. 41% of Black queer youth report facing discrimination because of their sexuality, and 46% of Black queer youth report being targeted for their gender identities. Charlie finds safety, love, and acceptance in the program with their chosen family. Mr. Tesfa is a single father living in New York City. His son, Bekele, a rising 9th grader, has attended the same after-school program since the 6th grade. He attends a charter school where staff members say the principal, quote, railroads Black boys. When Bekele was in jeopardy of being held back a grade, Mr. Tesfa reached out to staff members at his son's after-school program for help. At Mr. Tesfa's request, the executive director, a Black woman and former assistant principal, accompanied him to parent-teacher meetings and advocated for Bekele. The principal was moved to another school after parent organizing, and with the support of staff members in the program and his family, Bekele's grades improved and he began to thrive. These two stories reflect the lived experiences of youth and families I've engaged with as a researcher and a former youth work professional. In my talk today, I will introduce to some of you, but also reintroduce to many of you, community-based youth work, those who hold up this field and its connection to Black education, and tensions and paradoxes stemming from anti-Blackness and other structural forces. I'll close with an opportunity for all of us to think about workers in precarious positions who support young people beyond the school walls. As some of you might already know, youth work is the process of guiding young people through personal, educational, and social development, most often within informal settings, like after-school programs, or what I've called throughout my career, community-based educational spaces, out-of-school time programs, nonprofit youth organizations, development organizations. Sometimes they have many names. These programs support our economic and family systems by allowing parents, like Mr. Tesfa, to work past school hours and provide their children a safe place to play, create, dream, or just be after school. They are lifelines and places of refuge for young people experiencing harm at school, at home, in their neighborhoods, or those seeking opportunities not found in their schools. Many organizations provide a range of activities beyond academic support that aid in educational attainment, like social, emotional, cultural, and political identity development. 74% of parents believe that after-school programs keep their children safe. 69% of youth show improvement in homework completion and classroom engagement, according to the After School Alliance. At least 10 million young people participate in after-school programs annually. But this is a conservative estimate, and the actual numbers are likely higher. You may be familiar with national organizations like the Boys and Girls Club or the YMCA or Girls Inc. I'm curious, how many people in the room have participated in a youth development organization? That person. What about, how many of you have participated as a staff member, as a youth worker or program director? Lots of you. All right. So beyond these long-running programs, the field also includes independent grassroots organizations, and also museums and libraries, public housing, faith-based spaces, federally funded college preparatory programs, facilitated on university campuses like Upward Bound. I was a youth worker in the Upward Bound program when I went to Berkeley as an undergrad. Informal spaces like barbershops and laundromats as well, or detached programs where organizations meet young people where they're at. So that might be on parks or folks who might be living on the streets, to offer basic needs like food and clothing or temporary shelter. Currently, my team and I are trying to map the field to locate the many spaces where youth work happens. Identifying these spaces and organizations and programs has very real policy, labor, and organizational implications. This is just a kind of a list of various types of youth work. You could probably locate where you might have been centered as a young person or as a youth worker. I spent probably 2 weeks in the Girl Scouts. They didn't like me. I didn't like them. So that relationship didn't last very long. But as you can see, there's just an array of the types of programming that can take place with young people. This far-reaching field complements schools and benefits broader society, yet its contributions and precarity are often unseen. Community-based educational spaces are taken for granted, and the experiences and suffering of the staff members who hold up these organizations are hidden. As trusted non-parental adults guiding youth as they develop crucial parts of their identities, they are integral to young people's experiences within these spaces. Youth workers are critical to the educational workforce. They are vital to the functioning of the field, but they are understudied, undervalued, and underappreciated. The United States has roughly 2.5 million youth workers, only 650,000 less than full-time classroom teachers. However, this number may not fully account for just how large this workforce is, as many volunteer and part-time positions span various locales where young people are in need of support or may be confined. I'm also beginning to work with colleagues who have access to things like IRS data, census data, to use various methodological tools to help us get an accurate account of the workforce. But it cannot be overstated that school systems and the economy depend on this workforce existence and quality. Yet these workers face precarious employment. In other words, many suffer from failing social and economic networks of support that leads to various forms of suffering, that leads to many risks without protection. I see a connection between youth workers' labor and other essential workers like those in healthcare, nannies, people in early childcare, school paraprofessionals, who are critical to how society functions, yet under capitalism are made vulnerable and often exploited. Because youth workers are situated as care and education workers, even though their legitimacy as educators is frequently overlooked, which I've written about in previous publications, their work, like school teachers and those in particular nonprofits, is typically viewed as noble, or a labor of love, or a calling, as journalist Sarah Jaffe argues, which ultimately furthers their exploitation. Youth workers labor in the shadows within a field that is sometimes rewarding, yet unstable, with deep paradoxes, leading to challenges in their personal and professional lives. These paradoxes manifest in 3 ways. First, society relies on youth work, but there's a lack of recognition and underinvestment in the field. Second, youth workers' commitment to noble work keeps them exploited under capitalism, leading to low wages, debt, food, and housing precarity. Third, organizationally, these spaces can simultaneously disrupt and reproduce harm to young people and youth workers. I argue that these paradoxes deepen precarity in the field for Black youth workers due to anti-Blackness. My book, tentatively titled The Youthwork Paradox, Shaping Black Futures in an Anti-Black World with Stanford University Press, asks, what are the experiences of Black youth workers amid a sociopolitical context marked by persistent anti-Blackness, immense racial disparities, and social unrest? How do Black youth workers understand and navigate the youth work paradox? I use anti-Blackness as an analytic to identify and understand the specificity of anti-Black racism, drawing from Black studies, sociology, and Black education studies to theorize Black suffering and Black life. Anti-Blackness is a more precise framework to capture the structural, legal, cultural, and personal attacks on Black people and products of Blackness, and the ways that Black people are regularly subjected to social death, gratuitous violence, and their dehumanization or anti-human disregard in all forms of social life. My first book, Reclaiming Community, captures the challenges in the field given the neoliberal turn in education. My current book project focuses on the societal underinvestment in youth workers, focusing on Black youth workers as a microcosm of vulnerable communities doing this essential yet sometimes invisible work. I suggest that the broader sociopolitical context of youth work, including its history, shapes the field's precarity, leading to paradoxes in its structure, youth workers' professional identities, and within organizations that demonstrate both the fragility and significance, as well as the precarity and power of this work and of its workforce. I place Black youth workers' knowledge, pedagogical expertise, and determination to support Black youth's educational futures within a broader socio-historical context. To understand how I locate them within this history, I first must examine the paradoxes at the root of the American education system and the significance of Black education as a vehicle for liberation and for freedom. Schooling in this country has been a site of social change, mobility, self-improvement, as well as a site of violence, cultural shedding, and humiliation. As education theorist Michael Dumas argues, education policy is a site of anti-Blackness, in which the Black is constructed as always already a problem, as non-human, inherently uneducable, or at very least unworthy of education, and even in a multiracial society, always a threat. If we take Black education studies scholars seriously, then the act of pursuing education was a fugitive act, once deemed criminal and outlawed for Black people. I see community-based educational spaces as fugitive spaces or an escape for Black youth from the violence of schools. Historically, out-of-school spaces were used as sites of learning and sociopolitical awareness for Black youth to navigate a hostile world. Black communities have always found ways to educate, nurture, and prepare Black youth for the world as it is. Black churches often served as out-of-school spaces, advocacy organizations, independent Black publications provided essential educational and sociopolitical literature and activities with Black people with Black youth in mind. As historian Jarvis Gibbons explains in his book, Fugitive Pedagogy, Carty G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching, out-of-school spaces were critical sites of Black pedagogy, which cultivated learning and political identity development. He writes, out-of-school spaces were always important sites of Black pedagogy. Woodson's Sunday school classroom, sites like the Weekly Home, Black newspapers, and even his association. Woodson's conviction to support the educational development of Black people, particularly as it pertained to their radical and political identities, pushed him to operate in this way. Developing Black children's political identities was essential to understanding and navigating the anti-Black world because a lack of knowledge of the impending threat of white supremacist violence and terror could be detrimental. The pedagogy in community-based programs has always been diverse, but those that specifically help Black youth deconstruct how structural racism and anti-Blackness operate in their schooling experiences and within broader society have been vital. The contemporary engagement of Black youth inside community-based educational spaces is rooted in the historical legacy of Black education and spaces of learning Black people created for affirmation and survival. Aligned with the Black Panther Party's political education, free breakfast programs, and liberation schools, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's freedom schools, Black faith-based spaces, and Black civil society organizations, preparing Black youth for the realities of an anti-Black world has always been an important practice in Black communities and has always extended beyond formal school spaces, or what we might think of as formal school spaces. The seeds planted by scholars, educators, activists, the pedagogy for educational freedom and self-determination from groups like SNCC and the Black Panther Party are present today and can be seen within independent Black institutions, including community-based educational spaces committed to preparing Black youth for a world that refuses to see their humanity. Black educators and organizing strategists are paramount to movements for Black liberation, and I see Black youth workers as part of that tradition. My book speaks to this sometimes hidden historical tradition while celebrating and elevating the parallel experiences of Black youth workers today, whose contributions to Black education, their suffering, and victories in a precarious field needs greater political attention and deeper study. Class and gender-based narratives, paternalism, and moral panics about young people have shaped formal youth work since its inception. And for those of you who worked in community-based youth organizations serving predominantly kids of color, that might be very clear in terms of, especially like moral panics, right, about young people. What are they going to do? Let's keep kids off the street. The most dangerous time of day is between the hours of 3 or 6 when kids are out of school, right? Those are narratives that are popularized in these workspaces. So moral panics and paternalism and gender and class-based narratives have shaped youth work since its inception, and so has anti-Blackness in the form of control and surveillance. Historically, youth work in Black spaces, though with some tensions about pedagogy, gender, and power dynamics, had a clear purpose of educating for social change and political awareness. Youth work in Black spaces emerged out of a necessity in the face of white violence in schools and exclusion from spaces of public leisure and play. Later, after-school programs became repackaged as sites of control and surveillance for Black, Latina, and young people living in poverty, particularly during the early 70s and 80s. During this time, many organizations emerged in urban cities during the War on Drugs campaign, which fuels the massive mass incarceration we see today. The anti-Black framing of youth as super predators that are wilding in the 80s and the 90s led to anti-Black calls for the death penalty for the now exonerated 5, who ranged from ages 13 to 16 at the time of their false arrest. These framings positioned youth programs as spaces of containment for Black and Latina youth. This led to the framing of after-school spaces as sites to control, quote, male criminality and female sexuality, as Sue Kwan argues. As such, in philanthropy and in the public imagination, these programs exist to ensure that Black girls don't get pregnant and that Black boys don't join gangs or commit crimes. Framing in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s led to more anti-Black and paternalistic framing of Black youth as at risk or needing to be fixed or saved by after-school programs, thus generating deficit depictions of Black youth, which shaped how these programs are constructed and how young people are engaged. This deficit framing has saturated our political and popular discourse, like media and film, presenting Black youth from a position of lack, in need of white saviors, and sometimes Black male superheroes within youth work. This reinforces deeply held anti-Black stereotypes that ultimately inform funding decisions, marketing, and programming. These social policies and histories that shape the work practice of the United States are not just racist or paternalistic. They are deeply anti-Black as they render Black children and youth as objects, not humans, to be saved, surveilled, and contained. Youth workers must navigate these long-standing tensions and paradoxes in the field. So the stories I tell in my book, and the Black youth workers I introduce, emerge from several years of qualitative research with those connected to youth work in the US. Some of the youth workers you'll hear about today have entered the profession for very similar reasons, some commitment to Black education or because of their own experiences engaging with Black youth workers as young people. Some have high school diplomas, while others have advanced degrees, and most work in organizations that rely on philanthropy and not public funding. My research team and I spoke with 93 people connected to youth work from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds in changing metropolitan cities, suburban areas, and rural counties in the US. I conducted additional interviews with Black youth workers around the country. This national data provides a broader context for the ethnographic case study of Black youth workers in a city that I call Pleasant Ridge. The stories featured in this book present insights from over 100 people connected to community-based education and illustrates Black youth workers' roles as confidants, educators, and guides through some of the most challenging times in the lives of Black students. My book examines the interiority of Black youth workers' personal and professional lives to understand how they manage and resist precarity amid anti-Blackness, while also trying to support Black youth. So let's turn to the paradoxes. The first paradox I highlight is within the field itself. The arrangement of youth work in the US is tethered to education, family, and economic systems, but often made invisible and overlooked for its critical support to young people's academic and social lives. Community-based youth organizations are typically nonprofits. As Ruth Gilmore argues, nonprofit programs committed to social justice often do the work the state fails or refuses to do. The nonprofit sector structures civil society, and these programs often engage at the micro level to relieve the suffering that broader structures of oppression are causing. Robeson, a youth worker from the East Coast, perfectly captures the burden placed on the field. He says, youth work is expected to fix societal problems with the rich. So like the issue is actually the economic structure at large and the offshoots above that structure, intentional and otherwise. And we're supposed to somehow fix that with tape and bubble gum. Families, school systems, and young people constantly rely on youth workers. Many youth workers in my project receive calls from young people during their interviews. Hippolyta, who runs a violence prevention program in the southeast part of the United States, is seen by her youth as what bell hooks describe as another mother. During Hippolyta's formal interview, she received a call from a student who needed transportation to school because there was no public transportation or school bus transportation for him to get to school, and he was over 6 miles from school. So after getting off the call, she says, so I'm their only transportation. They shouldn't have to worry about transportation going to and from school or wherever. So that's another sad part. So, I Uber these kids every day. The next paradox that I want to highlight is the youth worker paradox. This youth work examines the youth worker's commitment to the work itself, often a profession that is called a calling. Commitment to youth development is not always rewarded in money, appreciation, or respect. The commitment to nonprofit work, like youth development, furthers the exploitation of its workers because of neoliberal logic that indicts workers for what they cannot manage, instead of the capitalist system that keeps workers suffering. Black youth workers experience exploitation due to the field's economic structure, as most programs operate on donations and grants, as well as gatekeeping from white racial actors in positions of power in their organizations. For example, Chris, a spoken word artist and youth worker from the Midwest, did not earn a living wage when he started working at his organization. He says, I was busting my behind. I think part of the reason that youth workers don't stick around is because they're not paid in a way that allows them to live. I was lucky enough to have another gig. I was lucky enough to, in some cases, lean on my art. I should also say that he illegally managed a nightclub on the side as well. After he would get off his youth work job, he would manage a club, and he told me that he was way too young to be managing drunk adults at the nightclub. Chris also discussed a lack of respect for the profession. He says, I feel like I should be paid in respect too. There are so many lives I've touched at this point over my 10 years doing the work. There are so many times kids have come up to me and expressed, I want to do what you do. I want to walk in the same pathway that you do. And I think this is so true for youth workers, right? Kids whose lives you touch want to touch lives in the same way that you have. The diversity and precarity in youth work make wages, opportunities for professional learning, and career ladders difficult. Brandon, a youth worker also living in the Midwest, faced housing insecurity as he juggled 2 jobs to make ends meet. During our interview, he told me, I've been homeless. I lived in a motel with my 2 sisters and their kids. He was evicted from the motel once the owner of the motel found out he was over capacity, moved to a 1-bedroom apartment, was evicted because it was him, 2 sisters, and their kids. He eventually found a landlord who would give them a 2-bedroom apartment where they could live. This is all while he's working 2 youth work jobs. One of Brandon's jobs was in early childhood, and the other one was a national after-school program. At the national program, Brandon shared the ways that he was always encouraged to apply for promotions, which would increase his pay. At the time of our interview, he had been with his organization for 8 years, and there seemed to be no promotion in sight. Brandon told me he was treated as a token to be in front-facing roles with Black youth or in marketing campaigns for the organization, but not in position of leadership. Barriers to leadership and decision-making power surfaced as a huge concern for Black youth workers featured in my book, especially those who are living in Pleasant Ridge. Pleasant Ridge is a predominantly white, self-proclaimed liberal progressive Midwestern city that boasts as one of the best places to live and raise a family. It also has immense racial disparities. It's a city where 74% of Black children live below the poverty line and are often locked out of opportunities for academic and social mobility. Several youth workers in my study felt overlooked for leadership positions in white-led organizations or felt exploited for their knowledge and connection to Black communities. And one example, Gina, an activist and youth worker in Pleasant Ridge, captures this issue as a panelist at an event that celebrates the liberal traditions of the city. So it's a city, it's a whole event that's dedicated to the liberal and progressive ethos of the city. She says on this panel, most of us get up every day to help ourselves. We want to help, but when you go out to apply for a job and need a degree, which I don't have, they say no. Yet they call me every day and ask me about the kids. What kind of sense does that make? because I don't have a degree? So while it may be easy to look at Gina's circumstances as a function of one program's policy for hiring, the exploitation is clear as she and other Black youth workers in Pleasant Ridge are called upon to have their brains picked about how to best work with Black youth by organizations that won't hire them or pay them for the knowledge that they do share. Unlike other professions, the credentials needed to be a youth worker vary by organization and sector. Some people enter the field through programs like social work or community psychology, or work for state agencies or local government that may require an advanced degree or licensing. Some have college degrees, while others only have high school diplomas, but have been in the profession for decades. Debates about credentialing and professionalization have long existed in the field. I cautiously enter these debates and be happy to talk with you all about this because stratification and inequities will undoubtedly emerge with greater professionalization. Finally, the final paradox I highlight is located within organizations. So a few years ago, I published an article in Educational Researcher about how organizations can simultaneously disrupt and reproduce racial harm due to the sociopolitical context shaping programs, the funding structures, and the lives of youth workers and young people. This broader context includes structural forces that impact how programs operate, which include racial frames and assumptions about Black youth that inform how they might be treated. In some cases, youth workers' responses to anti-Blackness and the treatment of Black youth participants, particularly in white-led organizations, had consequences. For example, when Carlos, a youth worker at an organization on the West Coast, noticed that Black students were framed in deficit ways on his organization's website, he shared his concerns with program leadership and said that he was retaliated against and demoted to translating materials in Spanish behind the scenes. The 2020 uprisings also exemplify aspects of this organizational paradox. George Floyd was murdered on May 25th, 2020. 2 months earlier, Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home when officers executed a no-knock warrant. Floyd was indeed an inflection point, but it didn't stop. Tony McDade, Rayshard Brooks, Andre Hill, Daniel Prude, Manuel Ellis, Devin Bronson, and the list sadly continues. During these uprisings against police violence, or what scholar and activist Robin D.G. Kelly calls Black Spring, Black youth workers were faced with confronting their own pain and mourning while trying to support Black youth at the same time. Harriet, a youth worker from the Southeast, explains, "As for George Floyd, I just turned off my TV for a while. It was very overwhelming to hear about it over and over and over and over again." Black youth workers had to find ways to hold space for young people and their families and help them process what they were witnessing and feeling, while also trying to do the same for themselves. This isn't like an amorphous theoretical thing for us, Robeson explains, as his students and their loved ones experienced police violence at the same time during the uprisings. Amid the uprisings, universities created hiring lines for scholars studying issues of race and anti-Blackness, and the sales of books on race increased. Companies and individuals overwhelmingly donated to groups like Black Lives Matter, and yet today these commitments have dwindled, or a backlash emerged, as one of my participants shared. Zora reflects, to know for sure that it was all a lie. It was all a lie, it was all a lie. All these companies were like, oh, let's give these Black-led organizations money. Even that, like all of it, was just publicity and PR. And then Zora says this about her own board of directors. Finally, people are listening to what we're experiencing, like, okay, let's open dialogue, and then to just go completely in reverse of that with our board. Zora's frustration is understandable. I should also say that Zora kept changing her pseudonym because she was afraid of retaliation from the board of directors. Here, the organizational paradox surfaces within the broader sociopolitical context. In this case, it's Black Spring, it's COVID-19, it's the constant circulation of Black death on our TV screens, but that further complicated Black youth workers' relationship with boards of directors, and in some cases, funders that ultimately shaped how they were able to do their work. In my research with Pleasant Ridge youth workers, this dynamic is reflected in the ever-tense relationship between funding entities and organizations that may perpetuate deficit framings of youth work or limit the work of organizations that appear to be too radical or pro-Black, according to Wahid, a longtime youth worker with incarcerated young people, and someone who helped to highlight some of the racial disparities in the city. He shared that some of the biggest donors in Pleasant Ridge were reluctant to give money to organizations that are too pro-Black. He says, corporations have a vested interest in making Pleasant Ridge look a certain way. And because of that, they give money And if the large funding group in the city gives money to these organizations that are being radical or being pro-Black, it's like, what are you doing? Many organizations experience mission drift or betray their program values due to funder demands, desperation to keep their doors open, or the structural forces which affect how youth are engaged. Gia, a youth worker with Black girls and an organization committed to racial and gender justice in Pleasant Ridge, led by Black and Hmong community members, shared her feelings about this common tension and contradiction that emerges in youth work committed to affirming Black youth. She explains, so I do think when you are a CEO or whatever of an organization and you're perpetuating negative stereotypes of Black kids in order to get funding, I think that's really effed up, right? Through these examples, we see layers of the organizational paradox. In addition to the paradox that shapes youth engagement, which I discuss in the article that I mentioned, the comments I shared from Wahid and Gia point to how the paradox functions through the sociopolitical landscape that shapes program decisions about money, their content, and leaders and youth workers' actions. This landscape includes the political climate, the nonprofit industrial complex, and broader social structures that ultimately shape how programs can do their work. So how and why does this all matter? How can we ensure that youth workers thrive and have the space they need to continue their incredible work? Youth workers are vital educators who benefit our society, yet their work is often invisible and delegitimized. How do we make visible the lived experiences of youth workers made most vulnerable by white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and other systems of power that make work precarious? Federal level, there is funding for organizations designated as 21st century community learning centers. If I had to bet, I would guess that many of you who said that you were engaged in youth work organizations, probably that center might have been centered by 21st century community learning grants in response to COVID-19, in which three or four programs were actually expected to close. Some states and cities use the American Rescue Plan funds or the Secondary School Emergency Relief Act funds to support programs and the workforce. And so this looked like buying snacks for children after school and things like that. Some state and city after school, out of school time networks were investing in programs, are continuing to invest in programs, and youth workers advocating for living wages and training for youth workers. At the moment, I'm engaged in conversations with the California After School Network, who they're trying to obtain a standard occupational code to help them locate the workforce. Because again, as I mentioned, youth workers are sort of scattered throughout many different organizations and sectors, which makes it really difficult to get an accurate account of who youth workers are and where they're located. More recently, the American Institutes for Research conducted the Power or Less survey to collect data on the workforce. Because the data on the workforce, including racial demographics, pay inequities, and other issues remain insufficient. This data is currently embargoed at the moment, but my understanding is that it will be released to the public. And so for folks who are interested in doing this kind of research, you can use that data to conduct your own research. So my book calls for educators, stakeholders, families, funders, and the general public to rethink education beyond the school walls and take action to support and invest in youth workers and understand their diverse needs based on their social positioning. My book also begs us to consider whose labor matters. There are some exciting possibilities in current labor movements that are beginning to include nonprofit workers in general, and I hope that youth workers in sectors that don't receive public funding can be included in the struggle. In closing, I have to reiterate something I wrote in my first book. Schools have never been and will never be the sole site of learning for young people. They never have and they never will. I see the work within community-based educational spaces and a long tradition of educational fugitivity for Black people. The Black youth workers in my book teach to transgress. They push beyond the boundaries of systems and paradoxes within the field as they envision radical possibilities in their work with Black youth. This sense of radical possibility is reflected in the participants in my study and the power of young people, the brilliance of young people, the brilliance of Black youth, and the strength of the emancipatory spaces of learning and care when Black youth workers work alongside Black youth to help them understand the conditions that shape their lives, generate tools to help them push back on systems that harm them, and dream and envision the world anew. I see radical possibilities within the youth workers who shared their stories with me, and a love and action that allows them to get up every day and work on behalf of young people for little recognition, little pay, and long hours because they believe in the work that they do. And more specifically, they believe in the brilliance, creativity, and the futures of Black youth. I look forward to having a conversation with all. Thank you.
We get to sit, get up and speak.
That would be great.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you again. If y'all could join me again in thanking Dr. Baldridge. The floor, we got about 10 minutes. And so we want to open up the floor for some discussion. Brian Cabral will take it away.
I got the next one.
You got the next one. Oh, Gary on.
So I had two. One, thank you for this beautiful talk. It was great to be able to see you conceptualize anti-Blackness in a social science research project. So it's really appreciative to see that framing here and how it came alive to the project. My first question conceptually is thinking about the map of youth work. And I would understand that there probably is a distinction between thinking about youth workers and teachers, but I'm working with a community partner who is a teacher in a school, but she runs the Black City Union, right? And so like this is an educational counter space that's there. And so it seems to be in that instance, I'm pretty sure many others are blurring of those lines between teachers who are also youth workers that are doing political education for students. And I wanted to invite you to speak around like what that nexus of work may look like together. This is the first question.
Okay.
And there was a second question around thinking around youth workers, and oftentimes how we discuss them or teachers is like their ability to do pedagogical activism for students. But I'm also wondering if there's also political activism that's there, right? Like what opportunities are involved in these projects to mobilize youth to get involved in larger social issues.
Okay. Great questions. To the first question, there is a lot of sort of overlap, right? And sort of thinking about teachers who are running extracurriculars after school, who may not be paid for that time that they're working after school, who are operating and functioning as youth workers. So my team and I were working on this topology of youth work spaces, but we're also working on this topology of youth worker as well. I've struggled throughout my career sometimes to think about like youth workers, right, as a category. It's legible in the US, it's legible in the UK, but also thinking about counselors, teachers, coaches, mentors, right? There's a range of sort of roles where youth work happens. And so Karen Pittman, who hopefully y'all are familiar with, is a youth work scholar who used to run the Forum for Youth Investment for a long time. So she always talks about how, that it was a mistake to label the field by time, right? Out of school time, because youth work happens before school, after school, summer, weekends, right? Like it happens, time is not the issue really. It was framed around time politically, right? Because everybody's scared of young people, right? There are moral panics about specific kinds of young people. So that's why that happened. But she advocates for us to think about the process of youth work. And so I think when we think about the process of youth work and the relationship building between young people and adults who are in those roles, whether they are called a mentor, a counselor, or a teacher, that the process of youth work is happening. The other thing I'll say to that, I'm looking at Brian a little bit, and other people who are interested in sort of theorizing youth work and thinking about critical youth work spaces and community-based educational spaces, is that I'm encouraging and inviting students to work with me to do this, right? So I do have a student at Harvard who is interested in the relationship between classroom teachers and youth workers and thinking about, sharing pedagogy. Yeah. Some of you may or may not know this, but there are a number of schools of education around the country who will send their pre-service teachers to work in after-school programs to work alongside youth workers, because surprise, surprise, youth workers have a way of engaging young people and could understand the whole child, and they're looking at their pedagogical expertise. And so there's lots of overlap, and I really want to advocate for folks to pick up that work. The second question, yes. My start in youth work, it's complicated, but initially it was around youth leadership development here in the state of California. And then I began to work with young people around social identity development. So I was working with Black and brown young people, thinking about race, ethnicity, and nationality, what those things mean, and helping them sort of deconstruct the world that they live in, a very sort of Freudian approach to engaging young people. And for me, it only took place in after-school programs. That only took place in youth organizations. That they never had an opportunity to talk about race in real ways in their schools. And to think about the current political moment, right, where it's really fraught to be engaging anything sort of related to race, or sort of thinking about queer rights, or to think about anything, right? But that the outer school space has always been a place of subversiveness. And I've clearly argued in my work that there are structures of oppression, right? When we think about philanthropy, when we think about leadership, so they can't be romanticized, but I still see youth work spaces as a safer space, a more flexible space to do that kind of work with young people. And sometimes, to be quite honest, I kind of have this, I'm of multiple minds, because while I want youth workers to be more visible, I want them to be paid well and validated for their knowledge as pedagogues, as teachers, people who have studied, whether formally or studied through their interactions or a long time work with young people. But I also struggle sometimes because there's some organizations that are hidden, and rightfully so, right? Like they're doing liberation work without the eyes, right, of the state so much, or they're funding programs in a way that doesn't keep them tethered to the demands of, so there's sometimes I want to protect spaces for this very reason, because the political identity development that is not just about having young people come into consciousness, but also engaging them, with opportunities to act and to engage in their, to push back on systems in their schools and in their neighborhoods. It's just a long, long, long tradition of doing that in workspaces. So, that was a long response.
It's great. Dr. Brown, I saw you had your hand raised over there.
Yeah, so the question is actually deeply connected to what you were just sharing. So the hours are 3 to 6, as you mentioned, unregulated. You don't have to ask permission to innovate in that space, but also widely unsupported by government financing. You have to independently finance whatever activity you want to build in that space, but you do have the freedom. You don't need to ask permission. What vision do you have for how we might use these spaces in more meaningful and effective ways?
I have so much to say about that. I have a really big vision. I think one part of it is that it's an idea sort of shift, or a paradigm shift, that when we think of learning and education, that we automatically don't go to just schools or just classroom teachers. That in the public imagination, we can think like, okay, young people have a village, right? There's schools, there are community organizations, there's youth workers, there's families, right? There's other young people, there's peer networks of support. So I really want to broaden people's understanding of how we think about education. And so at the top of that vision, right, is that people understand that youth work is a real thing, an important thing. And just the ways that the sector not just supports young people in their own development, but literally are lifelines for parents, right? There's another story that I could tell about my own brother, right, who is works for LA Unified School District, and he's a special education educator, and he can't get off work in time to pick up his kids, right? They live in Lakewood, and my dad lives in Compton. My brother relies upon to get the kids, 3 kids, when he can't make it. Like he literally physically cannot make it. So you have he's depending on my father. But then when my father can't do it, he depends on the school district's, STAR program, right? And for those of you who are familiar, there are school districts. School districts are supposed to legally provide some sort of supplemental education if needed. And so this program, occurs for a small fee. But still, right? If that program didn't exist, I don't know what my nieces and nephews would do. So the vision for me is that it's not, I need people to understand that youth workers, it's not just, it is something that is supporting young people and just their development as people, as humans, as citizens in this world, but also that it is holding up this sort of infrastructure of the entire economy and family, so that parents are allowed to work, that families don't have to fear that their children are taken care of. The other thing that I would like to see is investments, right? In my first book, there was a youth worker who talked about how for those of you who read my book, you might know this story, but the founder of this organization was the biggest donor. And he would withhold money from the organization when he was upset with the director, who was a Black woman. He was a white man. And so his money, his like, if he did not give money, the entire summer programs would just fall apart. And so there's a youth worker in the book who says, this is a testament to the fact that this program wasn't ours. Like, it was never ours, is what he says. And so that makes me think about, the infrastructure within communities to support organizations themselves, and finding ways and new strategies to not rely on donor dollars that are not aligned with their values, but that money could be put into organizations that allow these organizations to self-determine, right? To function in a way that allows them to do what they believe is best for young people and what young people want. There's probably more to say to that, but I'll stop there.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm curious what kind of pedagogical lessons do you think this space can offer formal learning spaces?
Ooh, I love that question. Can I say one thing first before I answer that question? And this comes from another participant, a youth worker who I actually worked alongside and had the opportunity to engage in research with, who told me that, she really wants schools to understand that they're not in competition, right? That they're all our young people and that there are strengths to what schools can do and there's strengths to what community organizations can do. I do have to put like a little pin in the school part, because I do sometimes I struggle with the ways in which young people are harmed in school spaces. So say that. But pedagogically, there's so much. And this is not to say that all youth workspaces are this way. But models that I think that work, that can offer insights around pedagogy, is eliminating hierarchies, right? That eliminating the idea that adults in the classroom know everything, having things that are student-centered, right? A lot of the programming that takes place in many of the organizations that I've studied, come directly from young people about what they're interested in and what they want to learn. And the skills of youth workers are able to sort of flip it and sort of, make it in a way that, they can learn something from it or process or deconstruct like what it is they're doing every day. So everything from social media use to political protests to, I remember the group of middle school kids I was working with, they were really into horror films at one point. And so youth workers created this creative writing course around horror writing because it was something they were interested in. So, and then also I think the other thing is relationship. I really think that is the core of youth work relationships, right? It's not that, I feel like youth are often othered, and we don't talk about that a lot in education. I used to teach a class on youth education and society, which is really thinking about the construction of young people, right? So a lot of this, teenagers are dangerous, or, the little magnet that's on people's refrigerators, you can't scare me, I have teenagers. I don't know if you've seen that. But there are these ideas about who young people are where we expect them, right, to be controlled and follow directions. And so that sort of pushes up against anybody who feels like they're in a position of authority. And I do feel like teachers are often trained, right, to do that. And so I think the other part of this in terms of pedagogy is thinking about the relationship. Is how do you think about this young person as just a young human? How do you think about a relationship of reciprocity, right? Where you are pouring into the young people, but you're not saving them, and they give you something too, right? Like to be a relationship with a young person is pretty remarkable. I don't know about you all, but they tell me the truth all the time. Like, especially middle schoolers, they will tell you the truth. And so that's important as well. And so I really think it's the youth-centered is cultivating the relationship, seeing their humanity, and then also cultivating opportunities to understand the whole child, right? That, you know, not that I don't care about academics, but oftentimes I feel like it's less important when it comes to how are young people feeling about themselves? How do they understand their place in the world? How do they make sense of their lives and the interactions that they have? And being able to do that in the classroom or partner with community organizations and youth workers who are able to do that, I think makes really successful relationships, educational relationships with young people.
Well, thank you, Dr. Baldridge, for sharing.